Hey, my name is Anthony Voltaire. I will be doing a cyber influence, cyber war, and cybersecurity presentation while delving into psychological operations within the United States of America, the USA's SOA and current implementations, a very general overview, as well as delving into the topic of coronavirus and how the West politicized the coronavirus, the effects on society, economies, and the future of the USA, technological progress amid divisions and worldwide efforts. Overview and agenda for this presentation will be very straightforward. The presentation will serve as a basic introduction. We'll be describing the state of PSYOP implementation, psychological operations for those that do not know what PSYOP is, in the general context overall, prior and during to COVID. It will also highlight the USA's oversight, program management, budget, and direction within the past 100 years. Focusing on military doctrine, pros and cons, as with all psychological operations, the growing effect of cyber influence, the effect on PSYOPs, HIP-OPs at home and abroad, keeping in mind it can only be done within the US. Applications in the age of information, how technology molds what we know, dictates what is known. Credible media, how American society was both sides of a script. Influence as a weapon, the general society TA's individual at all. So that's a very general overview. So what is cyber influence and what are PSYOPs? What are psychological operations? An introduction. Psychological operations are in short a general way to convey a specific message to a target audience through many efforts such as television, radio, digital mediums, etc. at all. Public broadcast paved the way for mainstream media present day, circa 1960s. An example, NPR, PBS, Associated Press, and the Voice of the United Nations during Vietnam. Psychological operations have existed for as long as mankind has had objectivity. Some examples include it being used in religious contexts and many others, such as during political campaigns. How the internet revolutionized PSYOP implementation / program techniques. So the internet made PSYOPs a very integral part of any society, specifically from America / the West. You have all these think tanks sitting in front of a computer day and night trying to mold opinions and persuading the public one way or the other. Digital mediums and limitations, an overview. To keep it brief, servers, hosting, and hacking are all problems that are a result of cyber influence / psychological operations and cybersecurity efforts overall. These present very real problems to any community that engages in such activities. Social influence, non-lethal weapons targeting civilians of the country, power or lack thereof, of suggestion, a breakdown and general overview. So American / USA efforts or Western efforts, the time lapse will be reflective of every single conflict that we've been in through proxy or indirect means of actually getting involved. American wars / imperialism, then now a holistic view, and I'll go into that one a bit later. It's outlined. I'd really like to bring attention to the Vietnam era and the Urban Fun campaign, which dealt largely with this type of technology that we're now seeing at an increase in America. And that is using the sublayered systems in order to convey and have all this anti-foreign rhetoric being reiterated day and night on these mainstream media outlets. With coronavirus, we have this whole, the Chinese are responsible, etc. But before that, it was the Middle East. And before the Middle East, it was the Latin American community. And at large, it still is a Latin American and African American community. So it really highlights how in America, really, they take a very, very negative approach to anybody who's not per se American in that sense. I'd also like to highlight the 9/11 and Bush administration and the precedent that was set for hatred toward the minority communities as well as the nation overall. Highlighting that point, Iraq and Afghanistan and broadcasting networks, keeping in mind the social influence aspect of these psychological operations. America basically went into Iraq and Afghanistan for weapons of mass destruction, which we now know almost every single country has, and they employed these psyops to shut down their broadcasting networks to try to dissuade the enemy from spreading this whatever applicable terms they used during that time. Another one was Coney 2012. Many of you might be familiar with that psyop. It included personal targeting, using family members, using ghosts and all that. You know, anything that was sub-layered on audio and comms equipment to get the person to get like psyched out or whatever. And we all know how Coney 2012 went. United we stand, divided we fall. Coordination among key governing sectors, locally, nationally, internationally. So right now we're dealing with, well, we've always been dealing with this. The American public is being spied upon by its very own government at the local and national sectors, and that presents a very dangerous problem for anyone overall, from the civilian all the way to the career politician and business sectors overall. So everyone's affected by this. Even right now, while I'm doing this presentation, there's somebody sitting on a computer listening into this shit because that's what their job is, looking at computer screens and surveilling everything. And that trespasses and breaches upon privacy rights at the local and national sectors because they really don't have much to do. And this is what many have alluded to. The pretense of countering terrorism does not give our local and national sectors any oversight or any right to intrude upon the privacy rights and clauses of the people of its own community and nation, and largely those abroad. So now that I've gotten that out of the way, the controlling faction of the PSYOP CMO activities includes the military, federal agencies, NGOs, regional organizations, and international organizations that work with civil authorities. In the U.S., this translates into FEMA, the DOJ, the CIA, and other federal agencies. PSYOP activities, regardless of national origin, are coordinated by and synchronized with these organizations. There's levels of surveillance. There's local, park-specific, bioregional, which is ecozone, and national, which is system-wide. Exclusivity. Due to the nature of coordination among key sectors, the USA has no clear oversight and no direct oversight. We have NGOs, FEMA, CIA, USIA, UN, the NSA, DARPA, DOJ, JCS, DOD, and many other foreign affiliates, which that's really how it is. You have personal security, national security, and international security, none of which really have any, in terms of the local and national chapters of government in America, none of which really can be employed against the general populace if there's no clear threat. That's just an excuse for them to leach data. Case in point. The free press versus the free press. Censorship with journalism and PSYOP strategy. Some things can be described as both. For instance, a TV broadcast can be a distribution method which transmits a product. Everything is a product. The internet, which is part of the cybernetic battle space, can also be described as a distribution method which contains products. And I'm not talking about it in the market affiliate context. The context that these terms are used here should make their meaning clear, as I prefaced. Some examples are swayed free press versus the independent media. So right now we're at a disparity in terms of credibility within the US. We don't know who to believe, largely because the Democrats and Republicans fail to come together. An example of a multifaceted PSYOP would be the, if you are all familiar, Judy Mikovits, which has a movie called The Plandemic. It's still up on BitChute and Brighteon, but has been censored all across YouTube and Vimeo. This is an instance of counterculture, decentralized core value PSYOP implementation that has both pro and con elements in one. QAnon is another example of a PSYOP for the, quote, resistance, and it highlights social influence and cognitive dissonance. Many people thought Q was a real person. They assumed it was one person. It was a man, which I'm pretty sure everybody's familiar with, Alex Jones, who did a lot of podcasts, and he was the very first to say, you know, this is a government-sponsored think tank effort to make the people have a set idea. And so following that train of thought, I just stopped watching all this garbage on the fucking TV and shit because it really gives you a bias and it starts to get to you in a psychological manner. And it's largely what the US has been dealing with as a populace overall, psychological warfare. So don't even watch this crap at all. It's just gonna make you like become a spiteful, hateful person. That is not the way forward. You could have your own opinion, whatever. Foreign psyops, a general overview, past, present, and future. So, it's important to note that the Soviet presidents that paved the way for joint doctrines, past, present, and future, such as the Bolsheviks, were largely used by many nations at which the USA was at the forefront. Chinese influence on the world through exports, that speaks for itself, leading superpower in exports and technological advancements and exports overall. Un-American technological exploits, as well as sweatshops. Middle Eastern resources, the blame game, using terrorism as a political strategy. Examples are Iraq and the Afghan war, petrodollar, mujahideen, and the need for oil at the expense of exploiting these countries under no real pretense, which we now know years later. For references, you can all check out the Pyramids of Persuasion in Strategical Employments, refer to Maurice Tugwell, Pyramids of Control, which was copied by the USA and implemented within their own PSYOP doctrine. Coronavirus is a PSYOP tool. Considerations. Coronavirus was said to have been live as early as November 2019. However, we are now finding out that it was active actually October 2019, and it was because of a diplomat that went overseas to China, and there's a lot of other stories. What the MSM is showing here in America has always been incredible, to say the least. So many people never believed it. They still don't. Call it a level of consciousness, if you will. The official narrative, after months of stroking the phallic efforts of the remote of television efforts, concludes that COVID was produced in a Wuhan lab in China. So they're saying it was bioengineered. As of the date of this presentation, that is still what the general consensus is. People are thick-headed. They really adhere to this hateful manner of speaking of other countries. The US weaponized the disease politically, genetically, racially, regionally, and that speaks for itself. It's still going. You can check any social media. You have people that are anti this and that, spreading hate, saying, oh no, we don't want Asians here, etc., etc. But it's always been like that. The West has always been very anti-immigrant. Government interference and fact-checking civilians, divisions within the USA. So the WHO pulled out of the USA pulled out of the WHO, and that will have detrimental consequences for the US as a whole. So when you have that level of disparity, of course the civilian population is not going to trust a single thing you do, largely because it's made up of minorities and immigrants. So where do you really stand in terms of progress and integration toward a better collective world? Displacements, economic collapses, free trade, the open markets in terms of the global economies. We're seeing this now at an unprecedented level that has never before been seen, largely because we get a lot of exports. The USA does. Or imports, rather. Whatever. We really get a lot of help from a lot of countries. Preventative measures do not work. The push for a vaccine. Examples, H1N1, SARS, flu, mutations, etc. That one is more opinion-based because you will have a lot of people that defend this shit, and then you will have a lot of people that say, oh, it doesn't work. So that one I just included to get an opinion. The power dynamic of COVID management and relation to the economic rises and falls of any nation worldwide. We're currently seeing it in the US. I can only speak from experience. The unemployment rate has gone up. It's continuing to go up, and now a lot of people are out of work. I myself have been unable to get any sort of income for the past 3 years, and during COVID, that is not changing. A lot of people are homeless, a lot of people can't pay rent, a lot of small businesses are closed, and it's really affecting the economic sector overall. PSYOP elements, fear as a weapon, doctrine, principle, a general view. So fear is weaponized when given the opportunity. The question is, what opportunity? PSYOPs attempt to implement fear through many channels such as TV, radio, media. The entertainment industry, for one, and predictive programming use adjunctly with fear as a principle. Fear is a nihilistic principle. There's pros and cons to this element, and the people at large of any nation dictate what is going to go forward. There are many limitations to fear, in large portion due to ignorance, indifference, lack of credibility in the age of information. Fear is different than being on edge. First and foremost, being on edge is just you're like on edge. Fear is like when you're literally scared. Being on edge is, I think the whole world is on edge now, to be honest. And then there's some examples that show the buy war bonds before it's late, and a selection of pictures that you can all see on the MediaFire link in the description. It just highlights how fear is used as an example over the years. Some actual examples and then some very weird examples. Following the trajectory path of fear as the ultimate fear, an example of the ultimate fear, EMP tech, Y2K 2020. Any country that has nuclear weapon armaments and capabilities certainly has jamming and grid-off technologies. There have been many attempts at creating the ultimate comms tech disruptors within the past decades. At the present moment, no one has perfected the technology, certainly not for the public view or perspective, as is typically the case with these types of projects. With the NATO alliances and treaties formed over the years, the term deterrence has taken a whole new meaning and direction. Why deter humans and machines when you can deter a nation itself? Considerations: a large area of operations that extends to the total extent of said country. We already have tech that can shut down cities, servers, etc. at all in an afternoon. Many people, I'm pretty sure, know how to do it. It's not that difficult. That's another cybersecurity threat. What the world has yet to witness is a silent attack that renders everything and anything making use of technology, which almost everything is embedded with technology, completely inept forever. Y2K was a precedent of what countries such as America will ultimately face if the status quo coalition of the foreign countries who supply the USA is not enough to get the individual to wake up and realize where we stand in the world rankings and positions. Nothing will. The level of patriotism can also shroud an individual in ignorance, willful ignorance, or no choice ignorance, because they're so fucking brainwashed to distraction that they don't realize the goddamn thing. Limitations of fear. The case of guerrilla warfare in overview. There are many ways that a small group of people can irritate, insert government. It does not take much to get to these control groups. That said, the way in which fear revitalizes people and gives them a reason to use the very same tactic has seen many uses throughout history. Fear used against the leaders, governments, etc. Specifically from the Western aspect of it, Cuba, Middle East, Vietnam, Germany, Russia, China, the United Kingdom, CIA operations, the Contras, the Mujahideen, other insurgencies, etc. at all. These are all some examples. The next slide is a picture. History repeats itself, interpretations worldwide, and it's just some examples of what I previously alluded to in the last slide. Why do other countries hate the US? Influence does not work in the same way as psychological operations do, though it incorporates PSYOP principles. Influence is a result of past and present and ultimately the future. PSYOPs are a means to divert attention and attempt to persuade a group or nation to see it their way. The specifics will center on the USA's involvement, good and bad, which there's not a lot of good at all. Let's be real. The limits of PSYOPs are largely the result of one major neglected element. PSYOPs attempt to mold history but do not employ the active use of history or the generally accepted overview of what history has come to be. Limitations to serve agendas end up backfiring on the attendees/coordinators, and that it has largely been represented and reflective of the American society as a whole. War is a racket. Foreign divisions have favored the US for too long. An overview of the CIA past, present, and future. So with great power comes great responsibility in regards to the USA's failure to acknowledge reality in the 20th and 21st century. There is a clear distinction between forging a national identity and imperialism. The CIA never directed anything directly or exclusively, though it has always served as a mediation group to bridge the differences among nations and insurgencies, promote change, and audit different sectors of all governments and economies' activities within said region, when and if applicable. Current day, the United Nations plays a very pivotal role in these endeavors as well. Without the CIA, we would not have America. There would have been no Bay of Pigs, Vietnam War, decline of Latin American influence, anti-Semitism, Nazi doctrine, Asian pervasion, etc. at all. Not exclusively because of their actions or funding of foreign objectives with U.S. interests, but the lack of oversight once the, quote, mission was accomplished. An example, rogues, the case of the Mujahideen, Cuban revolutionaries, Vietnam guerrillas, supremacy, etc. at all. Imperialism, a brief history of conquest, how our own tactics were turned against the U.S. DIME, which is a political aspect of the and principle of the PSYOP implementation, is not equatable to TIME. The case of France, the USSR, Middle East, Germany, Poland, and the USSR interpretation in reference to the American distortion of the Second World War. Educational perspective from textbooks in America. The case of Asian influence and Asian relations in America, the case of Israeli and American influence and relations in America, the case of Africa's development, Latin America's decline, past, present, future, and that speaks for itself. We're currently dealing with the Venezuelan administration and aid that is supposed to be getting to them, and attacks that were, the general consensus is the U.S. launched another insurgency abroad. That's been the case with a lot of people over the course of American history. No country will ever forget what our country destroyed, decimated, and distorted. How disinfo campaigns work. The internet. For example, this following thing is from a man called Tom Kratom, former regular Army infantry, enlisted NCO, and officer at the U.S. Army from 1974 to 2006. This is all from a public domain called Quora, which is for having an opinion. He basically, I'm not gonna read everything because this guy's out of his brain. He basically says that fuck anyone who's not from the U.S. and they can go to hell. Solve your own thing, and this is largely the effect of the brainwash and PSYOP capabilities of the U.S. on its own people. So of course it targets the American community first, but that doesn't mean it does not target minorities as well, to have this hatred toward other countries. That's been the case overall. This guy's basically saying that we are fine, we don't need any other country to intervene, yet he must not even be up to par or understand the very foundations of our evolving world, especially now when we're dependent on every other country for imports. Medicine, clothes, food, business, what have you, every single thing. Oil, it all comes from another country. If it weren't for that, then maybe the USA would have a chance, but I don't see that happening in the near future, and that's reflective of the World Economic Forums. The decline of the US dollar, events that changed history forever. So, living in an age of technology, we have unregulated digital currencies such as Bitcoin, Satoshi, Facebook, etc. All these are going to play a pivotal role into transitioning to a cashless society, which could have a very detrimental impact on the economies overall, but specifically the US dollar, which has seen a decline in recent years. We will have resource wars, imports, exports applied to the global model. Coordinator, Secretariat of the UN alluded to this problem, and yeah, that's very evident, especially in today's world. Over-reliance on paper, declining dollar value in a declining world. So we're the best only because of other people's imports that we paid for with high interest. Tariffs and imports that will be obsolete for other countries but pivotal to the USA global standing worldwide will really dictate where the USA is headed in terms of the timeline. Coronavirus on the USA's economy, the unemployment rates, steady but expected exponential decline of the economic sector. We're seeing it now, yet the politicians think that a check is going to fix our economy overnight. So, Having everything made in America, the push for ideology that would bankrupt our country, an overview at home and abroad, the harsh realities. Having jobs outsourced overseas by every single company is the only way to ensure that business thrives in America, while we take advantage of every other nation because of slave labor. Fashion is a military strategy. Sweatshops and the inflation of prices. This shirt came from another country. I think it was Indonesia. I'm pretty sure it was made for pennies, yet I paid like, I don't know, 30 bucks for it. That's a fucking, I hate that shit. Oil, the most sought resource. An overview of Western exploitation with many reasons. Weapons of mass destruction and the endless fight that sparked many terrorist cells at which the USA really started it all. Land disputes. We destabilized the region, which is why the UN had to get involved, and now we're dealing with the consequences of our own actions. Medicine is cheaper abroad, expensive at home. Look at the Canadian government. Look at the Latin American governments. Education, we trail behind the world in the educational sector. We're programmed to learn, not think. That's largely the biggest problem in American history. Technologies and technology. The future in the hands of the leading superpowers. USA need for cooperation versus USA need for domination. Maybe they'll learn this decade. Who knows? We clearly haven't within the past 75 years. The USA today. PSYOPs partially succeeded only in the USA, not abroad, and you can employ PSYOPs abroad. Major problems. The Americans that create bad reputations are principally the government and a small number of tourists, big groups traveling, and I've already alluded to this, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this one, but it's the general brainwashed populace that gives us all a bad image in the eyes of the foreign sector and international divisions of our world. We're not the only country, so for us to have an inflated sense of self presents a very dangerous problem overall, because if we're proving to the world that we only care about ourselves and we're really not giving a fuck about any other country, why would they give a fuck about us at all? The internet, the silent revolution, changed the way ideas are shared, created, and shared. Free publicity, no anonymity. In the past, television was a dominating, influential invention that has over time incorporated elements of mind control, such as those discussed in U.S. Patent United States Patent 6,506,148 by Loos, L-O-O-S, January 14, 2003. Nervous system manipulation by electromagnetic fields from monitors, but due to generational gaps has lost control, even right now as I speak. The future of media will largely be dependent on accessible devices such as phones, tablets, etc. This will forever dictate the mediums by which any and all operations will be forged, as well as shared. Can we censor and monitor everyone? Pros and cons. The case of the NSA. Paranoid thinking versus complacency. When you have a leading security agency looking at every single thing, even if it's not entitled to it, they fail to prevent a lot of atrocities that happen. While I'm on that point, these same local and national levels of security sometimes target the foreign community more roughly than they do their own communities. The case of mosques and places of religious prayer, these people employ the use of, and this has already been proven, employ the use of thermodynamic vision, infravision, etc. so they can see through walls. And this shit exists. Like, it's not a fucking magic trick. You have people sitting in front of their houses with this shit so they can see what is there, what has a heat source, etc. And yeah, no, they use this against mosques, and not only that, they use it against anybody because they just want to see what you're doing. And if it's not a set person, through proxy, it would be like ADT, for example, which has breached the American public's privacy as well as engaged in active espionage, and that was proven by the Fed, so that might not be a good point, but I felt like bringing it up anyways. Bringing it up overall at our current day,